The views and content expressed on the Pop Culture Courtroom are provided solely for educational and entertainment purposes and do not constitute legal advice. For any legal matters, please consult with a licensed attorney.
Welcome back to the Pop Culture Courtroom. I'm Hardin.
I'm Mayfield, and today we're going to be talking about Space Jam, the original movie.
Very much the original. We're going to likely pretend that the second abomination does not exist.
While I am a LeBron James fan myself, I can concede that the first movie was a much better movie and a much better subject for podcast today.
I will say this. I'm certainly a Michael Jordan over LeBron fan. However, I was a bit surprised with that second movie, given that LeBron does have charisma. He does a good job with commercials and the like, and makes good appearances and speaks well. But his acting is absolutely atrocious in that movie, which to me was a surprise, given that he's playing himself.
That wasn't my issue with it. My issue with it was the writing. It was just very complicated. The basketball game didn't even feel like a basketball game because of all the technology they tried to infuse into it. I don't mind LeBron, the actor. I thought he did a good job in Trainwreck as well. But the original Space Jam, I was interested the whole time, and there were times I checked out in Space Jam 2.
Well, Michael Jordan in this, also a extremely charismatic guy. There's a reason he's been one of the most famous athletes in the world for well over 40 years. Also, fabulous marketer, and I think holds his own in acting in this movie. He plays a good character here and pulls it off, and likely is why, given with the Looney Tunes characters, why this movie made over $250 million in the mid-90s when it came out, and the Space Jam 2 lost money.
And he almost hit half the shots he took in the NBA.
He did, that's true.
Anyway, we'll move on from this spirited debate, which has been had on ESPN more times than you can count.
If you want to get into the LeBron versus Jordan thing, we can do that now.
I don't think the listeners have 3 hours.
I think we could spend 2 minutes on it quickly. You know, you could look at things like that they were both Rookie of the Year, that Jordan won 6 NBA titles versus LeBron's 4, that he was the MVP one more time than LeBron won 6 finals MVPs compared to LeBron's 4. He never lost a final. I'll concede to you that LeBron is better at rebounding, and he is the best old NBA player of all time.
The only thing that Michael Jordan is better than at LeBron would be scoring, and LeBron is the all-time leading scorer in the history of the league. LeBron's certainly better with assists. He's certainly better with rebounding, and I actually think the fact that Michael Jordan, quote-unquote, never lost a finals is one of the most misleading stats in all of sports, because if I'm not mistaken, he didn't make it to the finals 11 years. LeBron has made it to the finals in half the years that he's been in the league.
Well, we'll say if you are willing to, be a mercenary and jump from team to team instead of staying loyal to one team your entire career the way Michael Jordan did. I read a stat where Michael Jordan had, I believe in his entire career, 4 all-time Hall of Fame level players play with him, and LeBron's had 12. And yet still has won 2 less titles than Michael Jordan did. And LeBron played a different position than Jordan. I mean, he's a forward. You'd expect a forward to get a lot more rebounds than a shooting guard. And LeBron also played in a time where NBA players are shooting a very high percentage of threes. The modern game that LeBron plays in is layups and three-pointers. And so he glommed onto that modern trend as well. And Michael Jordan's era, they shot very few three-pointers. I mean, it's something that, Jordan was a mid-range jumper and a dunker mostly during his career. But Jordan also won Defensive Player of the Year. I mean, LeBron has never even touched that award.
He's been first team all NBA defense many, many times over. I would say he's come close to that. Now, jumping from team to team, you're right. LeBron never played for a baseball team in the middle of his career. I guess when you say he played with his whole career for the Bulls, that wouldn't include the Wizards that he played for in his final 2 years, that he didn't come anywhere close to winning a championship with.
That's true. And he did play for the Wizards for a couple of years in his late 30s after having been retired for several years, and definitely was not the same player. They came back, but I think I've already conceded that LeBron's the best old guy to ever play. Did LeBron ever win the dunk contest? He did not, because he was afraid to even enter the contest, because I believe he said that he wasn't going to win it, so he didn't want to be in it. Jordan, on the other hand, won the 1988 dunk contest against the best dunkers the world's ever seen, including Dominic Wilkins in what's widely considered the best dunk contest the NBA's ever had. I'll concede one more thing. LeBron is the king of flopping. I mean, if you look at list of players that try to create fouls out of nothing by throwing themselves on the floor like a coward when somebody breathes wrong in their direction, I think LeBron is almost always listed as number one. The baseball thing is correct. I mean, he lost 2 years of scoring during that. I mean, he always scored more than LeBron. He won 10 All-NBA scoring titles. I think LeBron won 1 during his career. They play different positions, so it's somewhat hard to compare them. But LeBron also does have a bronze medal from the Olympics, where I think Michael only won gold medals.
LeBron won the gold medal the last time he played in the Olympics. So I don't understand that one. I also would say that maybe the dunk contest isn't the best barometer for who was a better NBA player overall. LeBron addressed some of the flopping stuff on the Pat McAfee show. If you look at his numbers in terms of the free throws he generates, he's actually not anywhere near the top of the league. So he needs to flop better, because clearly with how much he gets to the rim at his size, he's having to get fouled a lot. That said, I think we have not, in our 9 years of knowing each other, come to a happy medium on this one. I don't think we're going to do it right now.
This is a big question, who is the greatest basketball player of all time? It's not just about the NBA, it's about their entire career, and also largely what is their impact on the culture of basketball. You and I are also tennis fans. You're a huge Rafael Nadal fan. I'm a huge Roger Federer fan, and
We both lost that one.
we both lost that one because Djokovic's better than neither one of them. But if you look at the cultural impact of the players, Federer and Nadal had a much more big resonance on the world of tennis. And I like Federer better, but I sure do respect Nadal. I mean, he's great. LeBron, respect his talents very much. But if you get down to brass tacks and what are we looking at here on what the world of the culture are, I mean, I'm wearing Air Jordans right now for this podcast. I looked at the stats for last year on the shoe companies. LeBron's contribution to Nike was, it was nice. It was a little bit over $300 million. But if you look at what the Jordan brand did last year, a very long time after Michael Jordan's career ended, they made $6.6 billion. So ultimately where I come down on this is LeBron James is the Michael Jordan of not being as good as Michael Jordan.
I actually will concede that at least at this moment in time, Michael Jordan is a bigger cultural phenomenon. He's had more people know his name, and he's done better in business. That being said, a lot of that was achieved after his playing days. I think he was more popular during his playing days too. He carried the league. I can't recall in my lifetime the league ever being more popular than it was in 96 through 98. Which is, many of you have probably watched the Last Dance documentary. I mean, that was a huge time for NBA basketball, and the ratings for NBA basketball are not great right now. I would argue part of that is because LeBron James is towards the end of his career. But there is no argument for me that Michael Jordan is a bigger cultural phenomenon. I personally, just using my eye test, I pick LeBron. But we're not talking about LeBron today. We're talking about Michael Jordan and the Looney Tunes and the Monstars in Space Jam.
Well, set us up. What's this movie about?
So this was one of my favorite movies as a child. I watched it over and over and over. And when I rewatched it recently, I couldn't believe how short it was, because when I was a child, it felt like it was 3 hours. They do kind of a montage of his success in the NBA. This is set in a time between when he won the 3 championships on the front end, which I believe was 91 to 93. And then he's playing baseball in this time period. It's shortly after he lost his dad.
Michael's very, very close to his father, and it's largely believed that he went to play baseball because that was his dad's love. That was the sport he loved, and his way of, reconciling in the middle of what was then by far the most successful basketball career ever. How do you reconcile losing this close family member? So it's a very human emotion and reaction from, under any metric, one of the greatest athletes to ever walk the earth.
So one thing they do get right is that when Michael was playing for the Birmingham Barons, and they're an affiliate at the time were an affiliate of the Chicago White Sox, he was still massively popular. His highlights were being shown on SportsCenter, and the Barons were benefiting mightily from him playing baseball for them. They were selling out minor league games they wouldn't have otherwise.
And I actually saw him play baseball here in Nashville for reasons I don't know. Nashville at that time had a AA and a AAA team, which is odd. They both played at the old Sound Stadium here in Nashville, and went and saw Michael Jordan. And you've been to like all the sports games that are just electric, and that's what it felt like. You walk in there, and Michael walked from where he went over to where the bullpen where the pitchers were, and he got a standing ovation just for walking over there. And he played in the field. He hit a few times. I think he went 1 for 4 in the game, but it was just seeing him in person. In modern times, the last time I felt like that when I saw an athlete was when Messi played here a couple of years ago for the first time when he played the Nashville SC team. Just seeing an athlete at that level in person is amazing.
Yeah, that was old Greer Stadium. And my granddad, who played professional baseball, took me to a game there when I was younger, and he was in his 70s at that point, but he caught a foul ball, like reached in some kind of acrobatic way, and it was actually cool to see. So that was a good memory for me. So he has a poor game for the Barons. Baseball isn't going that well. Even the catcher on the other team is trying to give him some advice. Curveball, don't swing. And he still strikes out. And he gets home to his kids, and Jim Rome is criticizing him. And Jim Rome's been a fixture in sports media since time of making this movie in 95 to now, but he's kind of famous for negative rants. So I thought he's a pretty good choice for that. So he turns the TV to a different channel for his kids and goes, "Look, Looney Tunes, beep, beep." And all of a sudden his kids are watching Looney Tunes. I think it was Roadrunner Coyote. The Looney Tunes disappear.
So Looney Tunes' heyday was the 1940s to 60s. It's continued through modern times. Most of the voices in the original series were done by a man named Mel Blanc, who's nicknamed the man of 1,000 voices. His son ended up doing a lot of the characters later on, including in the movie Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which was another live-action movie that came out a few years before this, and likely the impetus for this movie being done because it made a lot of money. So the Roger Rabbit movie is famous because it had not only this new character, Roger Rabbit, but it is the only cartoon that's out there that includes the Looney Tune cartoons plus Mickey Mouse in the same one. So Mel Blanc did the characters that his son was supposed to do the characters in Space Jam, but could not get under contract. So they had a whole bunch of one-off people play the different characters. And so the voices, to me, as a longtime Looney Tune Saturday morning cartoon guy, as a kid, just sound different than what they would have been like in the original ones.
And that's an interesting fact. I wouldn't have ever noticed it, but at the same time, I'm on a little bit of a different timeline there.
I think you just called me old like LeBron.
I realized that about halfway through, so I tried to do it as nice as possible. Anyway, moving on from that, when the Looney Tunes disappear from the television, they kind of move on from it as if it's like not really a big deal, but that certainly would have, if I were a kid, I'd have been bugging my parents. What happened to the Looney Tunes? Well, they show these little aliens in space at Moron Mountain, and it appears to be this theme park in space. It actually looks really cool, but the plot point of the movie ends up being that it's struggling financially. So the head boss guy, who's this kind of husky alien bigger fella,
Voiced by Danny DeVito.
he is kind of yelling at his little alien employees that they've got to solve this issue, and their issue is that they want to capture the Looney Tunes, bring them to Moron Mountain, and basically capitalize on some of that Warner Brothers prosperity.
And make them an attraction, so it'll bring people back there. So how do they go about doing that?
So the typical way you should go about doing that is trying to enter into some sort of an agreement with the Looney Tunes or Warner Brothers. And instead, they use what legally can be called a self-help remedy. And those are discouraged.
What do they do with the Looney Tunes?
So they capture the Looney Tunes. They basically tell them, you're going to work for us. And Bugs Bunny and everybody, they like their situation that they have much better than that situation. And so they propose that they play a basketball game. And if the Looney Tunes win the basketball game, then they don't have to work for them. Now, the purpose of that is that the Looney Tunes didn't think these little tiny aliens could beat them in basketball. So they're like, hey, we know we don't have to do this, but let's just solve this quickly. Let's beat them in a game of basketball and then go about on our merry way.
It's amusing because all the Looney Tunes are tiny too. When they announce their heights later, they're all like 2 to 3 feet tall.
Yeah, the idea of Bugs Bunny towering over someone in such a way that they wouldn't be able to stop them in the post is pretty comical. From that point, the aliens and Moron Mountain actually agree to the Looney Tunes surprise. And in our world as an attorney, that's when our eyebrows probably would have raised. Why are they agreeing to this? Well, the reason they were agreeing to this is because the plan at Moron Mountain was that they were going to go steal the talents of some famous NBA players. And who were those NBA players?
Well, they go to this next basketball game, and they see they're playing the Suns, which Charles Barkley played for, one of the best players of that era. Announcer to this day on basketball, and they're playing New York, led by Patrick Ewing. Both those guys are all time level players. They sneak down to the courtside seats where they're like the old trick where kids hide in a raincoat. They're doing that. And what's amusing is they go sit down, and the actor that they sit down next to is actually the guy that's the voice of Homer Simpson. It's Dan Castellaneta. So they end up, I don't know, doing some kind of aura thing where they go across the floor and then zap the talents first of Barkley and then later Patrick Ewing in that game. As far as the other players they decide to go get, it ends up being Larry Johnson, famous for his Nike, what they call Grandmama. He was an all-star at that time period, played for the Hornets. And then you had Muggsy Bogues, who is largely known because he's tiny. I mean, he was a 5'3" guy, the smallest player to ever play in the NBA, and still would average 8 or 10 assists a game throughout the heyday of his career, and was not an all-NBA player. But my sense of why they chose him was because the other guy they chose as a fifth player was Sean Bradley, who was like 7'6", who was mostly well known for being posterized. He was a okay player. Posterized, for those of you who are not familiar, means you end up putting on a poster because somebody's dunked in your face.
And he was one of the tallest NBA players in history. And so to do that against a guy that's that close to the rim already is really difficult. So that's what the aliens had up their sleeves. So they show up to a Looney Tunes basketball practice, and they put their hands on this basketball that has all this talent in it. And all of a sudden they turn into these gigantic aliens that more resemble the NBA players for whom they've taken their talents. And the Looney Tunes now know, wow, we're in some trouble here. But here's the thing. I don't really think they are.
Why do you not think they're in trouble?
I don't think there's a contract here.
How come?
The elements of a contract are that there must be an offer, there must be acceptance, and there must be consideration on both sides. Okay, and that third part is where I think this fails.
What's consideration?
So consideration, it's basically what you're receiving, what you are to get.
So giving something of value for something in return.
Correct. So in this situation, is there consideration for Moron Mountain? Absolutely. They get the Looney Tunes to come work for them, and they probably boost their revenue because the Looney Tunes do really well. And they all of a sudden now have these new employees they're helping them prosper. But the problem is there's no consideration for the Looney Tunes. What do they receive?
I'm not sure there's an offer either. There's just a demand. I mean, this is a slavery situation. They've not offered them, like you said, any consideration, any compensation. They're just asking them to go serve the rest of their lives, and these are cartoons, so they're immortal.
Yeah.
Just to entertain and bring these guests in.
Yeah, I think Moron Mountain would offer that the consideration is essentially that they don't have to do that. Well, that's simply freedom, and they already have a right to that. So they're not receiving anything outside of what they already have a right to. I guess if the Looney Tunes felt some sort of sense of pride to honor this agreement, if they lose the basketball game, they could, but legally they're not obligated to. In fact, the courts really disfavor any lack of freedom of movement in the workplace. It's why non-compete agreements are often struck down.
It's hard to tell somebody you can't make money doing whatever you're an expert in for a livelihood.
Correct. And so in this situation, now, of course, would it be less dramatic when Michael Jordan reaches his arm out, 40, 50 feet for that last game, spoiler, for that last game-winning shot against Moron Mountain? Yes, because we are led to believe that that's what's going to happen. But in terms of enforceability, this isn't a contract.
The writing on the stretching is, I find, delightful because they're in Toonland playing this game, and the Tunes wait until there's 10 seconds left in the game, and they're losing by 1 point after they got pummeled in the first half, to let Michael Jordan know that you not only have your normal powers, you have extra powers, including be able to stretch out at extra 30 or 40 feet if you need to do that. It seems to me that may have been useful in the first half as well.
Well, this is a little bit of a fan theory, but as a big Cubs fan, I actually think he didn't have the inspiration within him to do that until Bill Murray arrived.
Well, I mean, he gave the head of the stuff he bottled that was the stuff they needed to be good that turned out to be water.
That's the most famous placebo in cinema history, though. So for those of you who don't know, the Looney Tunes are getting pummeled in this game at halftime. And Bugs Bunny knows that his squad needs some inspiration. So he fills up a bottle with water and he labels it Michael's Secret Stuff. And he tells everyone that Michael drinks that and that's why he's good. If I'm Moron Mountain, is that a performance enhancer? Is that like a steroid of sorts?
It reminded me tremendously of Harry Potter when Ron playing in a Quidditch game and they give him essentially water that they tell him is like good luck potion.
Liquid luck. I can't
It's
remember.
liquid luck, and he takes it and he plays really well. And after the game, they tell him that it was nothing and it was just him, and it gives him some level of confidence going forward. So, sometimes building confidence in your teammates, helping them to believe it's important.
One thing I do want to talk about, at some point along the way, Michael Jordan tells the aliens at Moron Mountain, hey, if we win this game, you got to give my friends their talent back. Well, is that consideration that might make this enforceable?
I don't think it's an enforceable contract at any level. They've stolen the talents of these guys. We see those 5 players wander around this movie just lost. They can't play basketball anymore. They're going through test after test in a hospital, EKGs, MRIs. No, you have the right to your own skills and to be compensated for them. All these guys have written contracts for NBA teams, and now they're not able to perform them. These contracts all contain terms like if you're physically unable to play, with the exception of maybe the NFL has a bit different way to looking at it. But in the NBA, they famously, if you get hurt and don't play for the next 5 years, you get it all. So they're going to get paid for this contract, whether they're doing it or not. But is the kidnapping of the players' talents, is that an enforceable deal? It is not. I mean, where I see there being a potential lawsuit here, if there's anything from this movie, is those 5 players who have missed out on their games. Their teams who've been harmed to it. They've probably lost games because a lot of those are, at least 3 of them are star players, and they may have lost games. We also know that they've had all this medical care, so there's going to be some physical damages in addition to the lost revenue for the teams. So the teams are going to have it. And is there another time? What's happening in the rest of the NBA during this time?
Well, that's a good segue. I first off, I agree with you. At the end of the day, all that's being offered is something that should have already happened. It's kind of similar to the old joke about selling somebody an elevator pass. You don't need an elevator pass. And in this situation, they have a right to their talent. So,
Well, and up in the ante was Michael Jordan going up and being in the sky forever, signing autographs all day long.
so
Michael bets on himself, though.
you bring up a really good point, and a lot of things happen in this movie that 7-year-old William just accepted and moved on and acted like wasn't a big deal. However, those have a huge financial impact on a lot of people. You've already talked about how these players would have a claim against Moron Mountain for stealing their talents because they're less marketable. They're not able to fulfill their contract with their teams and the league. Their confidence is being hit. They have medical bills. And so that one's the first one that jumps out. But what ends up happening is this domino effect of people who are going to also have claims, in my opinion. You've got the NBA, which ultimately shuts down because players out at LA, it was at the Forum at the time. It's now crypto.com arena.
We're like 2 arenas past that.
Yeah. We're refusing to play for good reason because these talents weren't just being stolen at one place. They were being stolen around the league.
Plus, Vlade Divac showing his extremely good acting ability during this thing.
Better post skills than acting skills for sure.
Also, something weird with that, though, too. They tried out that commissioner to cancel the season, which, is going to be millions and millions of dollars for these teams. It's going to cause problems with their TV contracts. It's going to cause problems with, are they paying players when the season's been canceled? We had something similar to that with the COVID years a few years back. However, is there going to be a huge government, windfall where these teams are, being subsidized to do this in this situation where aliens have come down and stolen the talents of a handful of guys? It shuts down the facility. And there's very real financial implications to these tiny little alien creatures stealing these talents. And we don't have a sense of how long the whole season was canceled, but you're talking about every day there's at least 12 or 14 games.
And absolutely. And there's also a big problem in that we know Moron Mountain is having financial problems. That's the whole reason that all of this is happening in the first place. Well, the amount of destruction these aliens have caused is certainly something that Moron Mountain's not going to be able to pay for, and probably not something that their insurance policy could handle either.
I don't know. I feel like a space alien theme park could do really well. The contract issues here, there's going to be contract after contract this affects with the players, the NBA, the television, and even Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan during this time's playing baseball. However, the Bulls continued paying his salary during that time period so they could retain his rights if he unretired, which is exactly what happened.
So that brings up an interesting point. The one contract where I'm not sure you could say that the aliens were the main reason for the disruption is the Birmingham Barons losing out on money while Michael Jordan didn't play. The Looney Tunes get in contact with Michael Jordan in a very similar way that Moron Mountain gets in contact with the Looney Tunes. They essentially capture him through a fake hole-in-one, which that's the biggest travesty of this whole thing is if I had a hole-in-one taken away from me and I figured out it was just because of a magnet, that would be devastating.
Well, there's also a bet going on there because you've got Bill Murray and Larry Bird playing, and they've bet dinner on whether or not, who's closest to the hole. And Michael, his tee shot is the farthest of the three, so he's got to lose that bet. Bug somehow uses a magnet. I'm not sure how that's working on the ball, but it does and circles it around, hole-in-one.
I don't know if it's a great argument that I was participating in a Class C misdemeanor and this took me away from that. But I certainly see how it could disrupt the buddies game. But at one point, the Looney Tunes have essentially taken Michael Jordan against his will. However, it becomes clear as the movie goes on that Michael Jordan is not doing this against his will. He chooses to help out the Looney Tunes.
He's all in, and Stan ends up getting to the Toon World where he's fighting. He's a loyal, second man for Michael Jordan, trying to help him out. Gets into the Toon World and does everything he can to help the rest of the way.
So I think any claim that the Barons have for Michael Jordan not fulfilling his contract falls squarely on Michael Jordan because he's the one who chose to do this instead of that.
No, I don't know. There's no way they'd pursue that. I mean, Michael Jordan bought a team bus so they could travel in luxury to go to their baseball games and brought notoriety to that team that they had not seen before and definitely has not seen since.
Matt, this isn't logic. This is law. And I totally agree with you. There's no way the Birmingham Barons would do anything to make sure that Michael Jordan played as many baseball games for them as humanly possible. That would include not suing Michael Jordan.
I just know if you put me or any Michael Jordan fan, which is going to be 90% of the people in the world at that time, on a jury, we're holding for Air Jordan.
For the second part of what we talked about today, it wasn't really a case or no case. It was clear that there's a case. It's just about how many cases there were.
There's a lot.
There's a lot. The players certainly have a claim against Moron Mountain for stealing their talents. The NBA has a claim against Moron Mountain for having to shut down the league and lost revenue from losing out on those 5 players and then their entire league. NBC was broadcasting NBA basketball at the time. There may have been, it may be like it is now, TNT or ESPN were also broadcasting games. So anybody who was broadcasting NBA basketball in any way, shape, or form had claims against Moron Mountain. And then it goes even further than that. People who advertised with the NBA would have ads that either weren't going to run or were going to run during a significantly less popular program. So there's a lot of people who were affected by this.
I think that's definitely true. I mean, we're not even going into depth the fact that these players that lost their talent had all this medical care for their individual claims. The vendors for places like the Forum or the Madison Square Garden, the folks that were working at those places that are often just paid if they go there. I think there's hundreds of claims here, and at the end of the day, you end up with Moron Mountain presented by the NBA.
I don't see a real bright future for Moron Mountain. In fact, I think the Looney Tunes had kind of lured over. They had made nice with the aliens, and that maybe the aliens were going to become part of the Looney Tunes. I don't watch Looney Tunes every Saturday morning like I did when I was a child, but I haven't seen those aliens much since 1995.
I have a more hopeful, optimistic view of this. I think they run out the guy, that owned the Moron Mountain, and then they assert their authority for the first time ever before they give the talents back. They take over Moron Mountain. They co-opt with Michael Jordan and the Looney Tunes, and then you've got this space destination for people to go to a theme park. That sounds awesome. I'd go to that.
Apparently, the Space Jam fan fiction is endless. So in summation, with this episode, we can confidently tell you something that you may have already known, but you may not have. You probably didn't even think about. The Looney Tunes were never in real legal danger of having to work at Moron Mountain, even if Michael Jordan missed that shot. Now, Michael Jordan, very clutch. Nobody was worried about him missing that shot. They knew he was going to make it, but the Looney Tunes were going to be just fine. However, Moron Mountain, all that destruction they caused, that's going to live past this movie. And I can only assume between the time of Space Jam 1 and Space Jam 2 that there were a myriad of lawsuits that came from this. Well, we're going to move on to our irrelevant evidence. So for our irrelevant evidence today, we're going to talk about the difference in NBA basketball and college basketball or amateur basketball, and the kind of odd phenomenon that NBA basketball seems to, at least by the numbers, be decreasing in popularity, while other levels of basketball are actually increasing in popularity.
I think that's right. And there's some decisions that have been made at the NBA level that goes back a very long time. There's actually, in the 1970s, there were two professional leagues. As you probably know, there's the NBA, which has been around a long, long time. And then there was an upstart league called the ABA. And the ABA is the entity that started pushing stars ahead of teams. You know, there were teams in places like the New Jersey Nets were one of the original ABA teams that came over. There was a team in Kentucky called the Kentucky Colonels when I was a very small kid. But they started the nickname deal with the NBA. You know, before that time, that wasn't really a thing. You know, Dr. J, Julius Erving came from the ABA. The Iceman, George Gervin, came from the NBA. And after those leagues merged in the 1970s, at that point, the NBA began marketing their star power, which coincided with the rise of Larry Bird and the Celtics and Magic Johnson and Kareem out the Lakers. And so there's likely some connection between how big the stars are at a given time. After they retired, there was a downturn, and then Michael Jordan came along and came up. He retired. We had the rise of Kobe Bryant, and then here in modern times, the end of LeBron's career, I believe they're very concerned about what's going to happen next.
Yeah, you bring up a good point in that the NBA is no stranger to a fluctuation in popularity. It was very popular in the Larry Bird and Magic Johnson era, and then it was extremely popular towards the end of Michael's run when he was winning championships with the Bulls. And there was a time period, I would argue, that the NBA was the most popular during LeBron's era, when he was with the Miami Heat, because you either loved the Heat or you hated the Heat based on his leaving Cleveland. And then his return to Cleveland was popular as well. But right now, the ratings are showing that the NBA is not doing as well as usual. And what we're going to talk about today, I'm going to talk about some things from the rule book standpoint, the style of play that could potentially be changed. And then you're going to talk about the structure of teams versus players and some kind of marketing type things that can maybe be different. What I will say, so I coached high school basketball when I was in law school, and I love basketball. I'm a huge Lipscomb Bison fan and Tennessee basketball fan. But I sometimes find myself not as interested in the NBA because of the differences between it and all other levels of basketball. And one thing that I think has happened over the past few years is that the NBA has gotten really, really analytical. These numbers guys, there was a movie about baseball called Moneyball that talked about using numbers and analytics to try to achieve the best outcomes that you can. And I'm certainly not against that. But in a way, I think that those analytics and those numbers have made the game less aesthetically pleasing in the NBA, to the point where now it's mostly threes and layups, similar to what you see Alabama play in college basketball. I think that has harmed the game, because if you we talk about Michael Jordan being the most popular player of all time. We talk about Kobe Bryant being one of the most popular players of all time. Well, arguably, their best offensive asset was the mid-range jumper, and that's almost completely gone from today's game.
I'd also say that the time period of the 80s and 90s when Michael Jordan was playing, even when Larry Bird and Magic Johnson's era, when they were playing, the defensive rules were very different. The Detroit Pistons were famously known as the bad boys NBA, led by Bill Laimbeer, as one of the most physical players ever to play in the NBA. And Michael Jordan still averaged over 30 points a game. the NBA at some point made a decision that they cared a lot more about offense than defense.
Yeah, I think that was centered around the finals where the Pistons beat the Kobe Bryant, Shaquille O'Neal, Karl Malone, Gary Payton Lakers. And that series should have been full of star power for the NBA, but there just wasn't enough offense for their liking. So the way that they changed the rules was they're like, what's a good way to get more points? Well, get more free throws, get people to the free throw line. So they got rid of hand checking and they called the game a lot tighter on the physical side. That's been one thing. But the rise of the three-pointer, while three-pointers going in seems fun, if there's no ball movement, if there's no beauty to the game, it's not fun. There are really average NBA players that have actually made more three-pointers than Larry Bird, who's one of the best three-point shooters of all time, and it's not because they're better three-point shooters than Larry Bird, it's because the volume of three-pointers is going up, and players like James Harden and Steph Curry have really kinda changed the idea of what is a good shot. You know, I see shots taken now that I would have gotten taken out of the game for taking when I was younger.
Oh, I agree. I mean, either the lack of defense. I mean, the NBA has had that staying on it for a long time, where people say that the players only try hard on defense during the postseason. But I don't know if that's true. All these guys want to continue their pro careers, and there's certainly players out there that had defense or rebounding as the main thing they do, and the teams that even do well now still have defensive stoppers. Dennis Rodman for the Bulls was a very good defensive player, very good rebounder, didn't score much, but he's integral to those last 3 titles they got.
Yeah, and when we're starting to run out of Draymond Green kinda comes to mind for the Golden State Warriors as mainly a defensive guy, but he was surrounded by 2 of the best shooters of all time. I would argue
Well, what's the fix?
the fix, I would argue because the players aren't less athletic. They should be the best defenders they've ever been. Should be the best athletes we've ever had. I was listening to a podcast and 2 Celtics players, Derek White and Peyton Pritchard, said that it's actually easier to score in the NBA than it is in college, which obviously doesn't make sense given the level of defender. In the NBA, you're not allowed as a defender to be in the paint for 3 seconds or more unless you are specifically guarding a player, which is different than all other levels of basketball where only the offensive player has to stay out of the paint for 3 seconds.
And that was a rule that originally came about with, very early NBA players like Wilt Chamberlain, who's this giant guy who was able to score at will down low, just to keep the player from camping out in the paint, right in front of the basket where the area in front of the free throws, because that's boring. You want movement, and so the goal behind it was to do that for defense as well, to open the lane back up for people to drive. But you're right. It's harmed their brand of basketball quite a bit.
And it has, and in the NBA, the lane is actually wider on both sides than it is in college. So you're not only are you taking an area where, well, let's say in college or high school, you want to play a 2-3 zone. Well, in that situation, the defender stays in the paint the entire possession. Well, you can't do that in the NBA. But not only that, the lane is even wider, so it's an even larger area that you can't stay in. So,
And they already got that semicircle where you can't take a charge right in front of the rim.
correct.
People can get dunks. And so that's already protecting that lane. I mean, you and I had this talk a while back that, the dimensions of the basketball court alter a little bit from elementary school to middle school to high school to college, the NBA. NBA court is 94 feet long. I would argue that they need to make the width of the court 10 feet wide or around that, just to increase the ball movement on the corners. I mean, the 3-pointers on the side of the NBA, you've got this tiny little area, even do it. So it basically takes out the defense up until that tiny little corner area. And if you make it to where you can roam down sidelines in a way you can, I mean, these guys are enormous for the most part.
So yeah, that 3 on the sideline is actually shorter because they had to make it a straight line and instead of a continuing arcing line because there wouldn't be any room to stand there. On its face, you think, oh, longer 3-point line, that should be tougher for the offense. But what it actually does is spaces out the offense in a way that the defenders are having to guard this huge, enormous area. Well, my argument would be that if you allow defensive players to stay in the key, that guys will be able to guard 3-pointers better because if they get beat, they at least know that there's someone there to help. And instead of that player who drives by someone going to the rim for a free layup like they constantly get now, they might have to pull up and shoot a mid-range jump shot. So that's how you bring back the mid-range jump shot. You're never going to be able to make a mid-range 2 as appetizing as a layup, because a layup is an easier shot than mid-range 2. What you have to do is create the rules to where it forces teams to take mid-range shots. And then you have a variety of scoring, which to me is when the league has always been its best. Some three-point shooting, some mid-range shooting, some post play. And I think this simple rule change would do that.
And maybe ease up on the hand check fouls.
Yeah, let it be a touch more physical. These guys now, you think about a player like Zach Edey, who's 7'5". Well, you're gonna feel a lot more comfortable going out and guarding a 3-point shot real tight, because if he gets by you, you've got that guy helping you on defense. Whereas now, you really have to kind of split the difference, because you don't want him to drive right by you, because that's an automatic layup. But it's just leading to too many wide open 3-pointers. And I think I saw somewhere where the Celtics somewhat recently shot over 60 3-pointers in a game. That's just not fun for me.
Well, Zach Edey, who plays for the Grizzlies in Memphis in college, notoriously had very few fouls called on him, despite the fact that he appeared to foul people at least 10 to 15 times a game, and he rarely fouled out. He went to the NBA, and suddenly he's having to play less minutes because he's getting a lot more fouls in a league that's way lighter on how they call fouls than the college was. So begs the question of, does college basketball protect its stars in the same way that the NBA does?
Well, he's also having to defend differently too, because a lot of times he's coming over on help side defense, but he's having to come over from outside of the lane. And it's almost an impossible task, and it's really devalued big men. I mean, if you look at the drafting trends over the years, it used to be big men were picked first overall really frequently. I mean, Hakeem Olajuwon, Tim Duncan, those types of guys. It's in general been either small forward type swing guys or guards that have been picked high recently, because it's so hard to be a big man in the current structure of the NBA. So I'd like to see that come back too. What else could the NBA possibly do to kind of get the ratings back in check?
Well, circling back to what I was talking about earlier with this pushing star players, which the NBA does to this day. I mean, everyone from Jokic to Doncic to LeBron, Giannis, Steph Curry. You think of those players first before you think of the teams they play for. And the NBA has lived and died with that for a very long time. And that's very different than every other professional sport, team sport in the United States, where you're pushing the Titans if you live here in Nashville. If you didn't hear even the Patriots, where they're just marketing Tom Brady at the time he was there, or the Colts when Peyton Manning played for them, it was the individual players are stars as part of the team instead of stars first, then team. And so because there's so many games, that's led to a disconnect with the fans, especially when they're doing the load management that they do so often in the NBA now. I believe they need to steer that big boat around and start marketing their teams in a way that the fan bases can follow them instead of just living and dying if they have a star player. So if you have one of the worst records in the NBA, say like the Charlotte Hornets in recent years, what are you going to see? Teams do poorly, then the fans don't go, people don't watch them on TV, and they're waiting to get that draft pick and hoping to catch lightning in a bottle for that next star, and it's not a good way to run the business.
One of the things that really hits on what you were talking about is the success of the 2024 Olympic tournament. It was really, really competitive. There were stars in that event, more so than in Olympics past. But at the end of the day, they were playing for the name on the front of the jersey. And that was what everybody's focus was on. And it just felt more competitive than some of these NBA games recently. In recent years, there have been whole years that were defined by a trade that was made more than the team that won the championship, which highlights how specific the NBA has gotten at using its stars to get an audience. But at the end of the day, these are franchises. People like pulling for a team, pulling for something that is bigger than themselves. On an off note too, I sometimes will make this joke with my friends. The NBA will be playing organ music in a very important, there'll be a minute left, it'll be tied, and somebody will be dribbling down the court and dun 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 dun. I want to feel the intensity of the game from the crowd. That's what's so fun about going to live sports, is that the crowd can pump the intensity into the game. I think some of that music that's playing while the teams are playing kind of draws away from the intensity of the moment. It almost and also makes you feel like less a part of the game. So I would like to see these fan bases like the Duke or Kentucky fan bases that you don't want to go to Rupp Arena or you don't want to go to Cameron Indoor to play because they're hard places to play. I'd like to see the NBA to get back to that where you don't want to go to Golden State because you know they're going to be loud and that's a tough place to play.
I think that's correct. I mean, the NBA could be a better product than it is, and they need to market in a different way than they are. If you keep going the same course, that you're going to keep running into more iceberg.
The definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Well, we've had a fun time talking about basketball and talking about Space Jam today. We appreciate you giving us your time, and I'm William Mayfield.
And I'm Matt Hardin, and just remember what we really established here today. Michael Jordan, best player of all time. Thank y'all.
The Pop Culture Courtroom is a Matt Hardin Law production.
If you've been involved in a car wreck or any other type of personal injury or wrongful death case, check us out at matthardinlaw.com or give us a call at 615-200-1111.